Charleson Bell is the Director of Entrepreneurship and Biomedical Innovation at the Vanderbilt Center for Innovation and Design and a Research Assistant Professor of Biomedical Engineering at Vanderbilt. Julia Pollak is the Chief Economist at ZipRecruiter, and Norma Gaier, my apologies, Executive Director of Texas Career Engagement at the University of Texas at Austin. Welcome to you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Norma, I'd like to start with you first by asking, you're focused on advancing equitable access to career engagement for undergraduate and advanced degree students. What criteria are students looking for right now in potential employers?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a conversation we have every day here at Texas Career Engagement. So our office was established just a couple of years ago prior to the pandemic, and we have found that most students don't always have the opportunity to engage in career thinking and resources and exploration from an equitable lens. And so what we're finding is that students are interested in employers who are authentic, who are genuine, who if you will, they walk the talk, right? I think we see a lot of rhetoric out there on the importance of DEI in the job search process, but also we need to take it a step further and look at what's happening on the other side. And once those students are hired, whether into internships or into their employment opportunities, what are their experiences? And those are the kinds of things, the evidence that we look for when we work with employers and we look at working with our students to be able to assert themselves, to feel confident in bringing their authentic self to work, and to engage in opportunities for growth.
How comfortable are students at this point in asking their hiring managers about their diversity and inclusion efforts?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it varies by population. So, you might look at our international student population, for example, and they often feel like they are in a deficit. They are in a place where they cannot negotiate as much sometimes, depending on their degree. But if you look holistically at our students and really look at beyond identity, just who they are as an individual, and many with intersecting identities, we are finding that they are quite comfortable. We ran some focus groups with students where it was evident that that is a high priority for them. We took some students on a trek recently, and that was a common question they asked employers that they visited, is tell me about your DEI programs and affinity groups, and what does belonging look like? What does culture look like within this organization? So I'm excited that our students, we're seeing that they are comfortable, but I think there's still a lot of work to do in that space.
Julia, I want to ask you as well, as we're looking at this new workforce that's going to be coming out very soon, as they're looking at these DEI opportunities, are we seeing job postings for DEI practitioners increasing?
We are seeing a very steady increase. It's one of the fastest growing sets of roles, from diversity coordinators to very, very senior roles involved with diversity hiring. And especially in this very, very tight labor market where employers are struggling to find candidates, there's been a huge shift in HR, with diversity hiring rising right up to sort of the forefront. Many companies are trying to find all kinds of ways to diversify and broaden their talent pools, to tap into untapped talent, and there are all kinds of ways they're doing that. For example, by removing irrelevant job requirements, education and experience requirements that kept out minority candidates and women disproportionately in the past, and that weren't really good measures of productivity or skills at all. So there's a shift to skills-based hiring from sort of degree and experience-based hiring. There are many exciting trends that have been forced by this economic reality, by sort of market forces. And we'll see how that continues if we see the labor market conditions slacken a bit. What does seem to be likely is that while those market forces may weaken, we also have a whole huge set of policies coming online in the coming months that will put pressure on companies in other ways. So, for example, in California, the pay transparency law that is going to take effect on January 1st is going to require companies to report on mean and median pay gaps from May 23rd onwards by gender and race. And so companies now are looking at this law and wondering how they're going to comply.
Yeah. And within that, are we seeing searches for the term diversity in job postings? Are we seeing people who are looking for jobs searching for that term specifically?
So it's interesting there. Over time, mostly searches for diversity have been sort of steady. The trend is a gentle sort of upward slope. So we do see that this is becoming increasingly important for job seekers, especially younger job seekers. And then whenever there's a big event that throws a spotlight on diversity, for example, George Floyd, there's a massive spike. And then people kind of forget, and but it becomes less salient just a few months later.
Charleson, I want to ask you very quickly, you are a firm believer in the value and practice of inclusive innovation. So I want to start first by saying, what does that mean? What is inclusive innovation, and how do you see companies being able to portray that?
Yeah, inclusive innovation is diversity, equity, and inclusion in action. So when we think about innovation, to us here, this is what we teach our participants and our students. Basically, in order to innovate, the first thing you have to do is empathize. You have to understand people's problems. You have to understand their challenges. And then you have to have compassion, where compassion means you see that there's a problem, you see people suffering, and then you go and decide to do something about it, and you do that. So that's compassion. Innovation is the act of creating positive value change. So when you have our innovators going out and doing compassionate innovation, compassion is innovation. They're seeing a problem, they're developing an innovative solution, and they're going out there to create that positive change. Compassion is innovation, and entrepreneurship is innovation for a fee. Now, when you're trying to innovate, you have to do two things really well, and I just kind of mentioned it. You have to empathize with those pain points, with those challenges, and then you have to come up with solutions and ideate solutions that actually bring solutions and actually solve the problems and the issues. And in order to do those two things, you need people of diverse backgrounds. You need people with diverse lived experience in order to be able to empathize with those people that are having a problem. And that's how you're able to optimize that. And then you need people with diverse backgrounds, experience, and expertise to solve those problems, right, in an optimal way. So when you bring those two things together, right, that is inclusive innovation. And inclusive innovation is the way that we can all move together united to solve the major problems in our world.
I want to ask how you employ an inclusive innovation ecosystem in your own work as the hub director of the NSF I-Corps Innovation Hub.
Yeah, so a quick background, the National Science Foundation has shifted kind of their model for I-Corps. I-Corps stands for the Innovation Corps. And what we do is we band together to take deep technologies that are at universities and in other places and translate them into products that actually provide positive change, create jobs, and stimulate the economy. And so I have some personal experience in this. I'm an entrepreneur myself. I'm actually the first graduate student in Vanderbilt history to raise venture capital for a startup. This was 10 years ago. There weren't that many resources out there 10 years ago. I had to kind of jump into this journey, went to Memphis, went to San Francisco. I was in Silicon Valley, and I rapidly realized that there's an ecosystem out there where you can start a company, but that ecosystem is not available to everyone. It's not fully equitable. It's not inclusive. So now here, 10 years later, I've been afforded the opportunity by being the hub director for the Mid-South I-Corps Hub, which stretches from the Mississippi Delta all the way up to DC, through the Mid-South, through all four of those states. And what we are seeking to do is we are seeking to create that inclusive innovation ecosystem, an inclusive innovation corridor that stretches through the Mid-South. What that means is that we're going to invite diverse mentors, diverse innovators, diverse companies to work together to translate these technologies into the market, but then also to provide an environment, right, for these diverse innovators to actually bring this positive change in the world. I'm talking about mentor networks. I'm talking about capital networks. I'm talking about the future workforce. I'm talking about reaching out and making sure that we are intentionally targeting those underrepresented and minority communities and marginalized community, both in the urban and the rural, bringing us all together such that we can create a viable ecosystem where anyone that wants to create positive change can do that in this inclusive innovation ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. And you, as you mentioned, were the first graduate student at Vanderbilt to receive an investment for a venture capital startup. But that had to have been incredibly challenging. So what can you say to others, particularly others, as you mentioned, from those underinvested, under-resourced communities, to make sure that they're continuing to push forward to get to where you've been able to get? But as you mentioned, it took 10 years.
Look, the number one thing is, I'm going back to what I mentioned before, as long as you're creating solutions and you're innovating ideas that help in the suffering of others, and you're seeking to create positive change, that's step one. Always keep that at your core, right? And the next thing is, look for opportunities that can help you move those positive change and that value into the world. And so one thing I did was, in that kind of environment, is I looked for people who were looking for me and who were looking to provide opportunities for people like me to create positive change. And I found those people, and these environments exist. I opened up my LinkedIn, I opened up my email. If you have an idea, if you think you can create positive change, if you want to be an entrepreneur, don't hesitate to reach out, because at least here across the Mid-South, that's something that we're committed to doing.
Yeah, and Norma, I want to come back to you very quickly and ask you that same question when you're having students come in, especially first generation and low income students. What advice can you give them, particularly as they're looking for environments that promote DEI?
Well, I think first we have to acknowledge that many of these identities that we're talking about are invisible. And unless we make it clear that, as we approach students, that we really think about, they're not walking around with a label that says first gen, right? Or that says low income. But we need to ensure that all of our services feel safe and feel welcoming, that there is a sense of belonging, and that there is a core movement towards opportunity. So I'll give you an example. One of the things that we identified at UT Austin when we started our work was that many of our students were not able to engage in probably the most important experience a college student can have. And that is an internship or some type of experiential learning. And often students who are first gen or who have or who are low income, they have financial barriers in place that often prohibit them from participating because they probably already have one or two part-time jobs. They can't engage in that career relevant experience. So we created an internship fund that allows students to apply for funding for unpaid or underpaid experiences, whether it's a full-blown internship, a micro internship, project-based learning. We want to support students because we don't always know who they are. So that is, it's opening up the door. It's taking our blinders off. It's being inclusive. It's in everything we do and say. That's probably the best advice I can offer as we think forward in our approach to working in an inclusive environment.
Yeah. Does it feel like companies are taking those things, those invisible identities, as you mentioned, into consideration now as well?
I would say they are, and I know that we just discussed there are more opportunities in DEI for employers and recruiters, but I've got to acknowledge the fact that just as well, many of our recruiters, Julie, I'm sure can attest to this, there's turnover. And so while they might get some stamina and steam behind their efforts in the DEI space, and they become familiar with these populations on our campuses, when we have turnover, we start all over again. So what we have found is we've created an educational program for employers called Hook Talent EDU. And that is an extreme, really, focus on and proactive approach to working with employers when they come to us to say, what are you doing in the DEI space? Do you want to learn more? And we're not always the educators in that space, but some best practice employers come to the table and share their best practices. There is a desire, more needs to be done.
Mm-hmm. Julia, I want to come back to you very quickly as well and ask, when we look at the tech industry and tech companies, what do we see them doing on the diversity, equity, and inclusion front?
So there are so many tools now that can help employers solve this problem, right? Employers understand that this is very, very important to job seekers, and they want to be more inclusive. Many of them just don't know how to go about it. But one thing they can do is, use online employment tools and marketplaces that use algorithmic matching and that rank candidates based on skills and experience. As hiring becomes more digitalized and more online, it is increasingly relying on objectively measurable criteria like skills and experience. Companies are moving away from the sort of the interaction that happens between humans that often is just so full of bias, and using these tools that are far more objective. There are vendors that keep popping up to help companies solve this problem. Companies understand it's not just on the hiring side, right? They need to help cultivate the pipeline. They need to give equal access to their roles. They need to advertise their roles very broadly so that they do give people access to their roles across the country. But then they also need to create a culture of diversity and inclusion internally. And there too, there are wonderful platforms emerging to help companies set up employee resource groups and to really promote sort of values that scale. There's great research about all kinds of things that companies can do. So when it comes to job postings, for example, John List, an economist at the University of Chicago, found that when companies only put on a sort of legal boilerplate EEOC statement on their job postings, it often turns minorities away because they don't want to be tokens, right? Mm. But when you use your job posting to include language that signals that you're really walking the talk and doing things that matter for people, like having employee resource groups, like offering benefits that are attractive to women and minorities, that are inclusive, like parental leave for all kinds of parents, that really does appeal to candidates far more broadly, and it encourages people who care about diversity to apply to your role. Mm.
Charleson, last question goes to you. Let's say once these students, they find the job either through the wonderful internship program that we have here at UT Austin, or they found it on ZipRecruiter because they were able to find that diversity label that they needed. When they're in that position, how can they speak up and advocate for themselves for things like the innovation that you speak about?
So I teach a course called Innovation, Activism, and Altruism. Okay, it's all about maintaining the balance between solving needs, capitalism, altruism. It's about finding that balance. And a lot of our students that come through that class and other classes are in this position where they may be in a minority setting, are in this position where they may feel like they can't speak out, they can't band together. I encourage anyone who's in that sort of position to take hold of that notion of innovation activism. You can band together. You can work together as a unit. You can bring people from outside of your particular group, right? Form the coalition. That's how we do things together. Come together, unite, and face the problem head on.
Thank you to Charleson Bell, Director of Entrepreneurship and Biomedical Innovation at Vanderbilt Center for Innovation and Design, as well as Julia Pollak, Chief Economist at ZipRecruiter, and finally to Norma, I'm going to get your name right, Norma Guerra Gaier, Executive Director at Texas Career Engagement at the University of Texas, Austin.